teaching environment that we were in. So I think you guys have all shifted into summer mode and a little bit of relaxation. So I'm glad to see that. But I'm going to kick it over to Ann now because she's going to help lead this work that we're going to do in July. So Ann, go for it.
Hello, everyone. I do have my camera turned off. I turned it on for a bit there, but I have some unreliable service. So I just want to make sure that to save all the capacity as much as possible. Joe Koloski is unfortunately unable to be here today, and he asked if I would help to facilitate this meeting and gathering and discussion. Everyone on the call today was former Teachers of the Year or Teachers of the Year, so congratulations for the hard work that you do for our students of North Dakota, and also congratulations on the achievements that you've received in your profession, some of the highest honors. So I feel privileged to be in a group of such amazing people today. As Superintendent Baszler had said, you know, it is summer and we want it to be, you know, nice and warm and out enjoying the weather, but we recognize there's this daunting feeling that school is starting. And what do we need to have in place? And in particular, what do we need to have in place in terms of our COVID structures for the pandemic that has been presented upon us? All of you should be aware that the Department of Public Instruction does have the North Dakota Smart Restart guidance, which is guidance that's been adopted by the governor on what does it look like when we restart schools, whether it be a soft opening for this summer or potential openings for this fall. And there's primary categories in there on like health and safety from the Center for Disease Control. Much of that guidance came from. What does academics look like? And we've referred our districts outside to some outside resources on academics. We also have talked about what does an SEL need or social emotional learning need of our students, as well as our teaching staff. What do we need to be mindful of to have everybody in that right space and place? And then lastly, there's a funding section. So the reason that we're bringing all of you here today is to really talk about how the State Teacher of the Years can help inform some of this work, and in particular, enhance the guidance in the academics and in just the logistics of being a teacher, and help provide some guidance to educators across North Dakota. I also want to let you know, although not on the call today, we will be extending not only the invite to Teachers of the Year, such as yourself, but also to invite the presidents of current content associations. So what I mean by that is like the North Dakota Teachers of Mathematics, inviting their president to be around the table. There's been a group of educators that are very passionate about music education. And, you know, when you're blowing the clarinet, like you have to think about some of the COVID parameters that we're in because of the nature of that instrument. So what does it mean for reeds, for cleaning, for space, for storage? So some of those content experts have reached out to us. So we thought not only is this a great place for Teachers of the Year to come and have their expertise, but maybe some content specific expertise too. So Kelsey, who is on the call, will be or has just sent correspondence to all of you, plus those association members, to identify some dates and times where we can get together face to face and go through some protocols in what does it look like to develop the guidance and so forth. There's a lot of talking, so I'll pause for a minute if there's any questions that the group has regarding the information that I shared or the resources and individuals that we will be inviting to bring this group together. Any questions on that? Okay, I am going to go to the COVID website. Are you all familiar with the Smart Restart guidance?
So I'm going to go back up just a little bit too and just ask the question. I'm assuming the email contains some different variations of not only dates, but like time frame, because I know that we had gotten some feedback that 4 days might be a lot to commit to. Maybe 3 or 2.5 might possibly be better. Bringing in some other groups on the last half day of the third or something. Does the email contain that, or are we just deciding on date frames at this point?
Kelsey might be able to speak to that a little bit more, but my understanding is just to try to nail down a couple common dates that we could even begin to focus on.
That sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. Now, I did put in the chat box the North Dakota Smart Restart guidance, and in particular, you'll notice on that particular page, we have the graduation guidance and then the actual Smart Restart PDF guidance. Nothing that you need to review right now, but I wanted to call it to your attention if it is something that you have not reviewed. So as you reflect on the last 3 months, 4 months of, we'll just say, of survival, my question to you would be, what are the common themes that you have found that you're personally that you might be struggling with? Or in what ways are you maybe providing some support or technical assistance to your colleagues? So let's say attendance. Let's say you're figuring out, okay, well, are they in attendance because they were on a Zoom call? Did I have to be flexible with attendance? Did I maybe have to meet the child? I think of the guy in Bismarck that like did a tutoring lesson through a glass window of a front door. And that would have been attendance, even though it didn't look like probably what the district had decided on attendance. So what would be some common themes? If you want to unmute yourself and share some of those themes or chat them into the chat box, we'd like to get just a broad understanding of, as educators, where did you find yourself possibly struggling or needing to go Google search and find some ideas, or where maybe were you a resource for others, and what would those themes be?
This is Mary. There's 2 things that come to mind for me, I guess, right away. One of them is just finding that balance of time and what's expected of the students to do to meet the rigor without overwhelming, without underwhelming, you know, just finding that balance of what are the appropriate expectations in that learning format when you can't like sit by the kid in their desk and see how they're doing. So, and I guess I've heard struggles with that both from the teacher side, but also from parent side. Both concerns that there's too much, there's no way I can keep track of all these ways of handing things in and that type of thing. And then also there's not enough, my kid is just checking on and then not doing stuff. So some of those inconsistencies, I guess, and then just I guess the other thing, I've heard some concerns of just what kind of modifications need to be made so the kids are actually doing their own authentic work, but yet, you know, how do we really capitalize on this distance learning opportunity? We can't just do things the way we were doing. And so finding, well, how can we tweak without having to redo everything, but make it meaningful and engaging for the students. So those are 2 things that I guess I've talked about with my colleagues and heard people talk about.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, and I do have to apologize because I just jump right in and we didn't do introductions. So do you all know each other? Do you need to do introductions? Okay, assuming that I'm just seeing a little bit head nod, we're going to go ahead. But before you speak, if you want to introduce yourself, say where you're from, that might help others. And Heather, I think you're unmuted, ready to go.
Okay, this is Heather, and I'm from Jamestown, and I teach kindergarten. And some of the things that we found that were more difficult was helping our EL students. It was hard to kind of guide them through the process, especially at the kindergarten age level, but other grades also found that as well, especially depending on how much English language was actually spoken in the house. The kids in kindergarten across our district, we found they needed more support. You know, they kind of need to have a parent sometimes right beside them to get them logged into the Zoom meetings. You know, that's not something a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old can do very independently until they've had enough practice with it. And then you had to take into account the scheduling of the parents, because some parents were essential workers, some parents have night jobs, some parents work during the daytime. So when can you find those best times to help meet the needs of their students? So we were in Jamestown, we were trying to meet a lot of needs all across the clock, and some of those teachers then felt really burnt out.
This is Linda from Langdon. And I think one of the concerns our school district had was, what are timely assignments? When are assignments late? When are they considered to be on time? And how late do we let them turn them in? So timely assignments was a concern.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Sarah from Minot, Sarah Medallion. A couple of the things that I wrote down, kind of echoing what the girls already said, I agree those are some issues that I've heard as well. But one of the things that I've heard a lot of families talk about is the one-to-one devices, and that in our school we aren't a one-to-one device school. Some schools are one-to-one device. So sharing the device amongst family members when there's maybe 4 kids in the family, or even 3, that gets tricky, even for meeting with teachers and scheduling those times to meet. Also the fine line between student the workload, kind of like Mary said, but giving them I've heard from parents that kids got done with their work so quickly, and then they had all this time and they were trying to fill in this time. And then as a reading and math interventionist, my students needed so much more help, but so they didn't get done with their work right away, and they might not have ever gotten done with their work because I wasn't able to always meet with them. So those were some of the challenges that come to mind for me.
Thanks again. And I want you to know that we have staff on here that are helping to capture notes. So we can take what you're sharing today and help inform our work for when we are able to meet face-to-face on site.
This is David from Fargo, and I teach Latin, and I'm in the high school. And so for us, or what I heard from people, are some of the frustrations, the inequities. Of course, we just assume every kid all over has their own house, and every kid has their own room and stuff like that. But what I saw happening, as did others, there are some where their parents are essential workers, they're going, so they're babysitting, and they're sharing their room with the other ones, and they're all trying to use the same room and listen. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, is there's not equity within all homes and how that works. And I think, how do we solve that? Or like even having office hours, as you said, your hours had to be extended way beyond. One of the young ladies I work with was, she'd do her 4 hours worth, in her younger brothers and sisters ended up doing their elementary, and so she had to help them and wasn't available because they were doing afternoons or whatever. And that meant that for me to help her, I had to make sure that I was available at 4:30, which again was no problem, but those are all the struggles that people were having, I think.
Most definitely. And I think that, our schools really banded together to try to solve some of those. Like, I think of how the school lunch programs were just able to stand up, roll out, deliver. But there's some things like you're talking about with space and place and home and family structure and kids and responsibilities. How can we address those inequities? And I hear you talking about hours outside of hours that you're working. And I think that goes back to what was said earlier about a little bit of burnout. I wonder too, what we're hearing anecdotally from our college partners are that those kids that are graduated as seniors and now enrolling in college as freshmen, they do not want to enroll in a virtual course. They're having a very hard time getting any new coming freshmen to enroll in a virtual course because I think they might have a tainted experience. So, that mindfulness of all of those situations. So thank you for everyone for sharing openly. Amy, I want you to know I don't see your picture, but I do see you on the call. So if you do want to share, feel free.
This is Amy from Minot, and Heather and I both teach kindergarten. And so one of our big concerns at the younger level was, Heather mentioned it, that our kindergarten students need an adult to help them log in, needed an adult to help them get started. Others have mentioned consideration of parent work schedules, and that I had some essential workers as well that were parents. And another one that hit me hard was I have had families with multiple students. So one child might have been using mom's cell phone and the other child was using an iPad, and then the other two had to wait. So I think we're seeing some common themes among the group of us.
Thank you. As a mom of a kindergartner and a former teacher and distance learning with my 3 kids, I can attest to being next to the kindergartner to kind of help facilitate the process. And I would say it was time that I wouldn't want to spend it any other way going through it, but I can also say I don't know if I want to repeat it this fall. So there's elements to love, and then elements as a family, how you continue to grow. How about what we hear in the department are educators struggling with grades, with attendance, with, I hear device access, I hear family scheduling. What about some of the traditional school things that we have in place? Were those barriers, or did you have pressure points regarding those types of concepts?
I think one of the things that was brought up earlier was the fact that the grading concept, and that's where the struggle lies. How accountable can you make them? Because what if their problem is more the internet problems that keep them from getting stuff in on time, and how long do you wait, and all of those things. So I think all of those fit into how do we solve that for those who struggle with their internet's not decent, and those that may be the problem. Whereas, there may be others who are just making excuses because they know they can too. And how do you actually know who is and isn't?
We really struggled with that too. And I think, our motto through the whole thing was err on the side of compassion, err on the side of compassion. That's what we just kept saying at our staff meetings and amongst ourselves. But it was hard to find that common ground of where that is, and when are we letting kids off the hook. And I just didn't feel like we did that too much, but I felt like it was okay for getting through the end of the year, but we also talked if we're going to start the year, then we need some more parameters, and we need to kind of talk through with students a little bit more about what are the expectations, what do they do if they're having troubles, more troubleshooting things too. So that was definitely just some of those grade books. When do you put in zeros? Do you put in zeros? Some of those really detailed things, I think.
So you just inspired a thought. So talking about those parameters, did schools have like a launch call with students on, okay, here are the parameters, these are the general expectations, or was it just dive in, we're starting school on Tuesday? And I would say on the flip side, what did that look like for educators within your school? I will say from my experience in Bismarck, it was varied. I think it differed by grade level, and I think it also differed by school. So I'm curious to hear, not right or wrong, just like what was it, and is there value in anything we can learn there?
I'll just quickly talk and then I'll be quiet again, but Mary again. And I teach biology at Delac Burlington High School, but I forgot to say that. But we met with it. We kind of came up with a framework, a team did, and shared it with the staff to make sure the staff could live with it. And then we sent out multiple newsletters through social media, emails, every way we could with the guidelines, and then talked about it during that first week with the students, what the expectations were. So it was first when we sent out like practice schedules and how this might work and how you might manage your time, and then talked it through. So we shared that with students and staff and parents in as many formats as we could at the beginning.
Thank you. What about others? What did rollout look like for you?
I think it was pretty rushed for a lot of us. Again, not having the experience, I don't fault anybody for that, because we're on the fly and coming up with a system as best we can within that. And I don't think that we were totally clear with all of those parameters, nor do I think that we knew what all we needed to send out, because we didn't know what the problems were going to be. So and again, not faulting anybody, I think that's just the hard part. And now that experience.
Yeah, I hear you 110%, David. Like this is our first pandemic. Like you don't know what you don't know. So I totally agree, and at no fault of anyone's. I think what we would love is, to pick the brains of this group and what are common themes of supports or structures or guidance or the things that you learned that we could share with other districts or with other teachers that might be looking for some support and resources.
So one of the things as we've been talking here.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Whether we could give or look at, again, in the small schools, I don't know that that's possible. Again, there's just not equity and how it all works. But in the larger schools, some of the teachers probably would prefer if their spouse is at work during the afternoon and then would come home in the evening and be able to watch the kids. Maybe they would prefer teaching on a schedule that's an evening type of schedule, and vice versa. And looking at some creative scheduling wherever possible, where kids got put in groups that works best with their family schedule, and both teachers and students together. And I don't know, is there some brainstorming on how that could look? But again, that maybe we'd have to do co-op type of things with smaller districts within counties or whatever. I don't know.
This is Sarah Medallion again. I was thinking some of the survey, a large majority of the surveys that came back to us at Sunnyside indicated that there was some struggling with families on the platform. So they were getting messages on Remind, they were getting messages on Dojo, some of their kids were doing their schooling on Facebook, some of them were doing their schooling through Google Classroom. So I think that was one thing that we've discussed too, was having maybe some kind of a common platform. I think that's something to think about too.
I will say, David, great points before, and Sarah, we heard the same things from at the state level. Just all the different platforms, communications. You felt bombarded at times as parents.
This is Heather, and I know one of the things that we did at my school in Jamestown, which didn't happen at every school, and that was another thing, even within Jamestown, every elementary school was kind of doing their own thing. And so when parents talked across the town, they all were hearing different messages of what their child was getting at this school. But at our school, one of the things that we really tried hard to do during this pandemic, because we knew that honestly, for some families, school was not the most important thing at the time, was listening to the needs of our families, what is working well for them with the teachers. So we'd have a lot of Zoom calls once a week with our families, where the teachers in the evening, or sometimes they were during the day, so we could kind of hit everybody's schedule with the parents, what was working well for them, what was not working well for them, what could we do to help them, how could we change things. And so we took a lot of their feedback, and then we would meet as a teacher group and decide with their feedback, how can we make things easier, be more supportive to our parents.
This is Linda again. And one of our concerns was the consistency of how students handed in their assignments. Some were coming email, some were coming through chat, some were turning in through Teams. Some sent it through the mail. It was hard to keep track of all those assignments coming in different directions.
This is Mary again. One of the other things I heard from parent perspective, and I know I've talked about this before, is that just some really the need of some students to have so much management and so much reminding and coaxing really put a strain on that parent-child relationship. And I know that we've talked a little bit at our school about, maybe the possibility of having, other like paras or somebody else do some of that professional nagging, guiding, whatever, so that the parents don't have all of that weight. It's just some kids just need a lot more support to get, to just stay on task and do that type of thing. So I don't know if that was a big deal, but I certainly saw it in some families where it was just the parents were exhausted from they felt like their roles are really changing because of that.
So I'd like to hear more about the feedback loops that you've had in place. So I think you're giving me us ideas on what parents said, how students felt. What feedback loops did you have in place to hear from your constituents?
It's Sarah again. I'm not exactly sure. Do you mean like the information that I gave through a survey, or are you talking about everyday feedback loops from families?
I think a little bit of anything and all. So did districts or did your schools get survey feedback and adjust the course? Was it consistent across the district? Were there open forums or I think Mandan had like an 800 technology line, a help desk line for families. Like, were there strategies to increase or to create an avenue for feedback?
This is Heather again. At our school, we did weekly Zoom meetings with parents. We created a Facebook page that was just devoted to parents for COVID learning for 19. Our technology department set up helplines that was district-wide. And then district-wide, we utilized a parent app where parents could reach out with questions that they had from any place in the district.
I guess in Fargo at the end of the year, all the teachers got together and discussed within their different subject areas, and then we're reporting back. But as far as anything with parents, I know that some were sent out, but we've never talked as a whole teachers or anything like that. I'm guessing principals, administrators are all dealing with that, but we didn't have anything in the middle of it necessarily here.
It's Mary again. As far as formal feedback loops, we really didn't have any. We had, we tried to just when we'd hear something, report it back to admin or the counselor. The counselor did a lot of outreach. And then when she would get feedback from parents or from students on what was not working or what was working, but mostly it was what was causing stress, then she would share that with us and we would try and adjust. But there was no, that we didn't have a formal mechanism.
Maybe that was a tricky question too, so I apologize if I stumped you. Okay, I want to know more about engagement. Oh, Kirsten, yes, please, at any time.
Okay, I just want to be cognizant of everybody's time. And Anne, if you can stay on with Kelsey, I think it will be helpful. I need to be respectful of your time, but there's a lot that I would like to share with you today to get your specific feedback. I wanted to have Anne spend some time with you because she and Joe, as she mentioned, are going to be developing the time together over those days in July. And I wanted to make sure that she had an opportunity. I think we're meeting again before then, Anne. So again, you can pick up on the engagement. But as I said, I just need to, I need to share some things with you that are a bit time sensitive as we move forward. And I need to get your feedback on them before we go any further. So what I'm going to do today, right now, is I'm going to share two things with you. I'm going to share visually with you the results of the survey, and we'll kind of go over that at some high level. And if you can make some notes, I'll take your comments on everything that you see at the end after I show you everything, so I can make sure that I get the most important factors or most urgent factors out and solicit your opinion and your perspective. The second piece of information, the second document that I'm going to share is actually just created. I had a meeting today from 1:30 until 4 with a group of diverse stakeholders, North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders, North Dakota School Boards Association, Nick Archuleta representing the Teachers Association, but multiple superintendents and a building level principal were there, along with Joe Koloski and I, talking about drafting some document. We had the North Dakota K-12 Smart Restart document that guided some restart for our summer school and some other factors, but we are really trying to create a new document that will guide the fall reentry, and some guidance. And I also noticed, I'm going to pull up one other thing. It will make more sense. It will make a lot more sense. The email that you just got in your inbox that Kelsey and Anne were talking about is this, and I hope you can see it. And I'm going to highlight something. It says, good afternoon. We hope this email finds you safe and well. As you may be aware, DPI is seeking teacher perspectives and putting together school reentry guidance for our teachers across the state. So this word, guidance, caused a lot of stir today. And guidance is being misinterpreted sometimes as must-dos or assurances. And so trying to explain that guidance isn't a law, but guidance is guidance, we decided that likely what we are developing are resources. And so what we will be working together on is seeking teacher perspectives and putting together school reentry resources for other teachers across the state. So we learned that today. So keep that in mind as you read your email and respond to it. That guidance has sometimes been interpreted by many that unless they check all of the box, somebody from the department is going to come get them and throw them, I don't know, in like teacher jail or principal jail or something. So anyway, words matter, right? We all know that words matter. So with that, I'm going to show you I'm going to share with you my screen for the actual survey that we've talked about. And did I send this to you? Just a nod of heads. Did I send you this actual document? Okay, I will afterwards. Perfect. Okay, what you have here is what type of stakeholder group do you represent? I'll tell you that we sent this survey out through the Department of Commerce and there were 1,054 registrants or 1,054 respondents. And this is the breakdown of who those respondents were. We had parent and family at 61.5%, community members 27.1%, teacher 22.6%, other 7.1%, public officials 6.1%, so that would be our legislators or even city elected officials, school staff members, so not teachers necessarily, but other staff members that could be paraprofessionals, ancillary staff of child nutrition, bus drivers, an advocacy organization, Designer Jeans, P&A, and any of those. A partner group or agency, students, very proud of that, 2.3%, districts, superintendents 1.4%, and principals 0.7%. Question number 2, what support would be most helpful to provide effective distance learning for students in the event that we need to address this option again in the future? Please select your top 5 choices. Coming in at 61%, ready-made lessons that are personalized to each student's ability. 53.7%, professional development or virtual training resources for teachers. 49.2%, digital platforms that provide regular educational content. 47%, student access in the home to reliable computer or suitable devices. 45.9%, 46%, improved physical learning resources to send home. Better internet access for students and staff, 32%. 32.2%, models of digital classroom practices. Access to printing services to create resources, 21%. Other, 16.5%. 12.3%, adult access in the home to a reliable computer or suitable devices. How do you want to see the state prioritize support to respond to the impact of school closures due to COVID-19? Addressing the needs of special populations, low-income students, students with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, homeless youth, etc. 58% professional development for effective distance teaching and learning. 51% communication and partnership with families. 49.9%, nearly 50%. Technology needs statewide, such as hotspots, expanded cellular data contracts. 49.5%, mental health services and related services for students and educators. 48.3%, online resources for personalized learning. 48.2%, additional personnel or extended contracts for personalized teaching and learning to address new or expanded needs of students. Question 4, online access to digital learning opportunities. So the question was, how should the state support potential learning needs for K-12 students as a result of school closures? And number one, 61.7% online access to digital learning opportunities, tutorial program through North Dakota Center for Distance Ed for all public and private North Dakota students, 55.7%. After school program grants for 2021 to address learning needs, 53%. Additional extended learning opportunities during the school day in 2021, 53.3%. 41.4% distance learning opportunities during the summer. 32.5% student scholarships for students to obtain tutoring. 20% added time for summer school in 2020, and other brought in 9%. Question 5, as I send this to you, you can tell there was no shortage. This was our comment section. Absolutely no shortage of people. Usually this is the one that everybody skips over. Only 2 people skipped this. 515 different comments. Isn't that crazy? So with that, a lot of things that we probably intuitively knew, a lot of things that this group has already talked about, but it's still really great to see that, and as we've talked about it as educators, you guys have, and that 60% of the respondents were families. You guys have captured what your families have been telling you. You have absolutely, put your finger on the pulse of not only how you feel as educators, but how our families are feeling too. And so it's really good to see this data. Had a meeting last night with the governor's office, and we're able to share it with him as we make some plans moving forward. So the next item that I'd like to share with you is the notes that were taken during this afternoon's meeting with that diverse group of stakeholders. And essentially, I'm digging out hold on a second. Essentially, my questions for the group, as I said, there were local superintendents, local principals, small, medium, and large school districts, north, south, east, and west, both public and private, school board members, teachers represented, Department of Public Instruction staff, and the governor's office. So essentially, I entered into this meeting saying I want to stay in the lane, in the state, as the role of government, as it should be. Government needs to help people. That's why we live in this country, right? They need to know their lane in good times, but they also need to know what their responsibility and role is in times of crisis. And so really trying to decide, what do our school districts need so government can provide for our local school districts, our locals, things that they just don't have the time, the energy, or the capacity to do for themselves. And I've used this with you before, and I've used it with our team at the department. At times of crisis, somebody has to be Red Cross. Somebody has to be FEMA that's bringing in blankets and water and cots to provide essentials so the locals can do what they need to do to tend to the people that they serve. And so the department, I believe, at this point in time has a responsibility to be the FEMA or the Red Cross of education for a very short period of time. But now, as the crisis has kind of waned and everyone's not as nervous about the pandemic, there's again that very North Dakota sense of stay in your lane. This is local control. And so my essentials were today, the questions that I wanted to answer were, what is it that you need from your government right now? What is it that you need from the state in order for local school districts to be empowered to make those decisions? When do you need it by? When do you need those things delivered to you by so you can make decisions for your students in your community? And then once we give you those deliverables, what can be reasonably expected of the state for each local district to be submitted? And what should we be expecting? What's reasonable to expect of who should be involved in making these local decisions in our local school districts? So that was kind of the premise and the structure of the conversation. So we whiteboarded a lot of things, and I will share with you the actual whiteboard pictures that I took with my digital camera. But what I'm about to share with you on the screen is a little bit more fully vetted and a little bit more filled out, I guess. Joe Koloski was taking notes. So I'll share that with you now, but I needed to set that up a bit. So number one directive, what do they need from the state? They need some adjustments made to the group size for from the governor's office. So group size must be adjusted. The 15 in a group must be allowed either expanded or allowed to be made up to a local school district decision. And then further distinction on when you say group size of 15 or whether we say it's a group size of 20 or 25, is that a mixed group of 15 or 25? Or does that same group of 25 need to be consistent from 8 a.m. in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon? So that was the first thing that they needed, some clear direction from the state on number of people. Second thing that they needed from the state was to retain the executive order in order to allow a school district to have distance learning count for instructional time. Because as you know, the only way that we've been able to count distance learning for instructional time is because the governor's executive order is in place, because at this point in time, the legislature has not given any authority to a school district to count virtual learning, distance learning as the required instructional time for foundation aid. So they said, we need to keep that in place for local school districts. Make clear what is a must or what is guidance. They wanted some clearer delineation in what is a have to do versus what is a resource or an exemplar or best practices. And then essentially, number 4, what they would like for us to deliver is to create a set of, I've just highlighted it, a set of parameters with a list of factors that a local school district can use to make a decision about whether they are going face to traditional school, all traditional, a hybrid, or all distance. They want that to be a local school district decision, but they want a set of parameters that a school district must use in order to make that decision. And the factors that they brainstormed today were of the factors that should be considered. Cases in a district, a county, and a school, the rate of spread in a community, the color level of each county, the rate of community spread, statewide hospital and ventilator access, and what the impact of border districts that have staff entering the state with a more restrictive environment. So those are the deliverables that they want the state to provide for them, so there's consistency across the state. The guidance, should there be guidance? Yes, they decided that there should be, but it should be clear that guidance doesn't mean law. Guidance doesn't mean must do. And then who should be involved? And they decided that educators and health professionals are people that should be involved at both the state level and the local level. So after the local districts, after the state develops a set of guidance that has this parameters with a list of factors that a local school district can use to make a decision, then we can expect that these people be involved to whatever degree is necessary or available within a local school district decision as well. So these are the people that were considered educators, and then of course, healthcare professionals, public health hospitals. So the next question came from our parking lot. So these are things where resources became resources, not guidance. The group of educators or field people felt that all of these things, 1 through 6, should be part of available resources that were shared on every website of NDCEL, NDSBA, ND United, DPI, DOH, North Dakota Recovery. All of those sites should have some exemplars of what does attendance look like? What are some schools doing for attendance? What should engagement of teachers be like? What should be some suitable or reasonable expectations for teachers? And again, we've talked about that here. What should grades, what will this look like? Are we going to go back to pass fail? I mean, it was, on the best of things, it was on the worst of things, it was called the wild, wild west. As far as grading went, I've heard it described as that. On the best side of things, I heard it described like Mary described it to do, assuming positive intent, just be kind, be gentle. Busing, what are some best busing practices, child nutrition practices? How are we doing with para training? What's the expectations of in the building versus face-to-face? And for this gets more to our special populations. Is there going to be full onslaught of services for face-to-face and building? What about those students who are vulnerable? Are we going to expect our teachers to, what is reasonable for them to teach an entire day for those students that need speech or OT or PT, and then a whole other set of teachers to go in and do in-home services? What's going to be reasonable and best practices there? And so those are the notes from today. And I just would like your reaction. I will send myself the pictures that I'll take and that I took, and then I'll show you what the whiteboard actually looks like. And it's a lot messier than the notes that Joe took. But so just some reactions, and we can capture that on any and all that I just shared with you.
This is Amy. So I have I've got 3 actual questions, and actually it would be to add to some of your points. So engagement of teachers, like I'm just going to actually add my questions as far as engagement of teachers. So do we want teachers to be expected to do live time face-to-face? Do we want teachers to be doing videos? I happen to use YouTube. I never did I did a couple Zoom meetings, but as far as teaching, because I wanted my weekend kids to also have access to any lesson. So I did videos on YouTube, but that was not a requirement because the districts don't want to say, you absolutely have to do a video. They didn't know what level of confidence the teachers had doing that. So when we talk about engagement of teachers, do we want an expectation of face-to-face meetings and in a live setting or videos? Or are we just pushing out assignments virtually and they never really see their teacher? Because all 3 of those scenarios did work this time because we were in crunch. And all of those did happen. So when I hear you ask, what would be the level of engagement of teachers? Do we want a requirement, or is that local control where the district gets to decide, right? My second question is how to use. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can we take one by one?
Yeah.
Because that's important. So first of all, it isn't going to be a requirement. It will be local control. But that's exactly the kind of conversation that I'm hoping and counting on that we'll have in those 3 days that we have together to come up with, have this group of experienced teachers fully vet that question, present maybe 2 or 3 different exemplars of best practices, and then have that as a resource for, okay, this is absolutely not going to work with the demographics or the type of teachers or students that I have. So that one's not going to work for my district in Horse Creek, but this one will. And so that's why I shared this with you. So these are the questions essentially that I'm hoping that you as educators will be able to have the time to flesh out and come up with some resources that would not be required, but that when school districts go back to make that local decision, and they then in turn include their teachers, their paras, their families, their principals, that they will have something to use to guide them about how do I have that conversation. So then that local decision can be informed by some best practices and exemplar resources. Is that helpful? Okay, so second, number 2.
My second one is, I think you had something that said bus drivers and somebody else and paras. And how to use paras effectively. And one district may have used them one-on-one with Zoom meetings with their students that may be on IEPs, but then some districts didn't use paras at all. And so, and if you don't use the paras that were there for your student, my goodness, you are putting triple, quadruple work on that teacher's shoulders if it's a special ed teacher. And maybe there needs to be PD on how to roll out plans for paras, because my goodness, our schools would not function on a daily basis without paras, and our paras could have made distance learning even easier. I shouldn't say even easier. I should say taking some pressure off teachers. And again, some districts used paras, but I know some of us did not.
So, and that's one of the things too that I think came from this group. In fact, I know it came from this group. To see your paras struggle with a lot of different platforms, where suddenly within 48 hours, they suddenly needed to become the masters of Seesaw or Google Classroom without any professional development. So not only what's the professional development and training, but then some exemplars or best examples of how to best leverage that para, because that's part of the conversation that is going to come from the other side, the business side, about what are our contracts going to look like with paras? Do we need paras? What, and if so I think to have some scenarios of best practices there too. Very good, thanks. And you had more.
My last one is going back to the health and kind of well-being of my students and myself. So a big question for me is, if a student in my class ends up being infected with the virus, or a family member, is my whole class out for 2 weeks? Am I out for 2 weeks? What if I get infected and I'm sick? Then is my whole class gone for 2 weeks? How, like, to me, is that something we might want to have laid out in some way?
So, so here are the next steps for this group. So what we decided to do today, I'm going to put it back up here so you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about. So what was decided today is that the governor's office and DPI can work on securing the answers to these 2 things: group size and some clarification on what that might be in fall reentry, and retaining the executive order to provide distance learning until the legislature can come in and secure legislative language allowing distance learning. So those 2, the governor's office and my office, will be working on getting some answers to with our Department of Health. The practitioners on the call today, NDCEL, NDSBA, and ND United, will be working on the set of parameters and a list of factors and what would constitute a school closure, define criteria for the school closures. So for these 2 things, these should actually be, I'm going to do this. So define criteria for school closure, which is what you're alluding to, Amy. The educators, the practitioners will be talking about these things and putting together their first draft. They said that they would have a first draft to the state, being DPI and the governor's office, by the end of June. And we're going to take that, what they believe would be their first draft of, this is the way that we want it to be. This is what should the cases in the district and county and school should be X if we are going to close. The rate of the spread in the community should be Y if we're going to close. So we're going to take those proposals to Dr. Stahl and Dr. Wynn at the Department of Health. and meet with the Department of Health to determine what those non-negotiables are. So, and then we will meet again face to face to try to come up with a finished document that we can deliver out to our school districts by July 15th. Because they need to start hiring and making some different decisions, some hiring decisions. Okay, so to specifically answer your question, Amy, as it stands now, under the old CDC guidelines, that scenario is if you were confirmed and you had been in your classroom, you would need to be quarantined for 2 weeks. If you were in your classroom building, if you were in that building for more than 30 minutes, you would need to close that building down for deep cleaning. Even your family, confirmed cases, even family members do not need to quarantine for 2 weeks. So most certainly your student, if a student got confirmed case, you would not need to be quarantined. Their classmates would not need to be quarantined. Their family members would not need to be quarantined, but we would need to close down that building, not that district, but that building. If you happen to walk, the contact tracing, if you happen to walk by somebody, or if you were standing, next to somebody for, 5 to 10 minutes, even that person wouldn't be considered a traced contact. So there are very definitive criteria. And so the reason that I shared with you the process of what the clinical safety side of things will be, where the educators will develop their best case proposal, it will still go through Dr. Wynn and Dr. Stahl, and they will decide the clinical side of things, of the non-negotiables, what some districts call tight and loose. They'll be loose on some things, but tight on others. So we'll let Dr. Stahl and Dr. Wynn, and they will err on the side of public safety. And so, but I just shared that process with you so you know that there will be a process. But to answer your question, even under existing guidance, that's how quarantine works.
I have a quick question about that. So and I know there's just so many scenarios to think of, so I probably shouldn't even be asking this, but if that would happen, would that school then be set up to go into distance education mode, or would those be days that would have to be made up?
So if the executive order expires, there's nothing in Century Code that allows distance learning to count for instructional time. So the school would need to make it up. There is always the clause that we had with storm days, where if it's not reasonable to make up that time using, spring break days and, storm days, whatever is set aside in the calendar, they could ask the governor for forgiveness. But given the fact that the executive order still is in place and we just are amending it to meet our needs, we would hope that distance learning or return to a disruption, that the school would have the opportunity to immediately deploy that distance learning.
Please tell me that will be on the agenda at the legislature next year.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because do you remember the bill that was introduced by a bunch of third graders in Jamestown? Darn it. But we know we had so many fears, and and all of the things that were actual legitimate questions about, well, what about our special needs students, and what about this, and what about, but now we've learned and realized through experience that those what ifs still can't prevent us from figuring it out. So, and I would imagine, I would be safe, I would guess that I bet the legislators would do an emergency bill on that, which means that it wouldn't need to wait till crossover, that they could actually kick it into the other chamber. If it's introduced in the Senate, they could kick it to the House, and it could be signed in even before crossover. So.
And Kirsten, can you speak? Because what I heard you say was that building would need to be closed for deep cleaning. Like, is that a day? Is that a 2-week process? Like, what does that entail? Do we know?
Yeah, 72 hours, I think.
Okay.
I think, and I'm remembering because before, so March 13th is when the governor and I had our first press conference, and we had those 4 levels. And if there was a confirmed case in a school, it needed to be closed for deep cleaning. And so I'm only remembering, and I'll try to find it.
No, that's just helpful for me to kind of frame.
Okay.
Maybe we should have a thing if somebody in our house is sick, they could have a deep clean at my house too. Like, I think it would take a little bit longer than 72 hours right now, though.
So for all of you teachers, you'll get this better than any. So think of it as like head lice. So when one of your school buildings has a rampant case of cases of head lice, you kind of do some different things. And I have been in a school where we actually did close the school building for 2 days because we just could not get the head lice under control. But we didn't close down the district. And we didn't make every kid stay home. And so I think there's a lot of things, a lot of precedent that's been set in a very different but similar circumstance.
Another thing we've talked a little bit about is who does that deep cleaning? We've heard I asked my principal and she said, I don't know, is that how we use paras, or is it how do you get a whole team in there to do deep cleaning?
It's professional services. So like disaster relief services types of, with the spray things. And
This is Amy, and I just had a question that we hadn't brought up yet. And at the DPI level and with some of your meetings with administrators, are you getting a feeling of any large groups or small groups of people that are saying, I absolutely am not going back to school. My child will not attend school. So you are hearing that from the public.
Yep. And teachers. And so those are some of the things, once the parameters are set, our district leaders and our district community, our school communities will need to come together. And ideally, like one superintendent said today, he said, ideally, I'll have 10% of my teachers that have said, I just cannot, I need to teach virtually. And you'll have 10% of your students that say, I just cannot, my child needs to learn virtually. So those are, once the parameters are set, some of those unique logistics will need to be hammered out at a local level, but impossible to do that at a state level. Say 10% of your teachers must teach virtually and 10% must stay at home. I mean, then there are ideas that are, I think the idea of homeroom teams or teams may find its way into high schools as well, where you have a team of math, science, English, and music teachers. I guess math, science, and math teachers, math, science, and English teachers that have a group of students. And so that's the Vikings team. And the Vikings team have on their A days, they are in the building. On their B days, they are outside. But when the teachers and the students are home on these days, and another group of teachers and students are utilizing buildings, and then when they're out, the other building and teachers come in. So there's some things like that as well.
So the possibility on the table is there could be face-to-face happening, and at the same time, there could be a small chunk in a district that's still doing distance learning and still consider that their public education. Because I'm thinking, let's say 100 kids in Minot, K through 12, if 100 kids, families said, I'm not sending my child, that's a loss of revenue for our district. So that is on the table, that there could potentially be distance learning and face-to-face at the same time. Yes. Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah, as Kirsten said, we're not only hearing that from families, but we're also hearing from educators where they might be medically fragile, or they might, have a spouse that's going through medical treatments and they can't be bringing home COVID germs. Like, what does that scenario look like? And we don't know the answers, but we know that it's a local conversation that has to happen. Because you're right, like that, those 100 kids in Minot are not going to all of a sudden go home education. They still want to be Minot public school kids, but how do we meet their needs potentially through a different avenue?
Yeah. So all of those things on that chart are some questions in addition to some things that you already shared with Anne today about what you had to Google or who came to you to get some resources. So that's to answer of the deliverables. What is the intent of our time spent together? It's to provide some exemplars, some resources, some best practices that our school districts and your peers across the state can use as they're making their own local determinations. So.
I can just pop in for just a second. This is Mary. I feel so relieved to hear you talk about that's your expectation, because I hear you saying more big picture, more guidance, more, I mean, not guidance, but, direction, rather than 100 lesson plans or that, because those specifics just don't get used, but
they don't. Yep.
Good.
Yep. Exactly. We just need to get, we're all like this. It's like, just give me an idea and then I'll make it mine. Show me. And that's why we all save exemplars from our student work, right? Because that's what our students need too. So, and that's what we're looking for. And even Mississippi. So Mississippi came out with some guidance too. And that's an exemplar for North Dakota to use. They actually provided some examples of what all traditional looks like in this new COVID time, what a hybrid looks like, and what all virtual looks like. And those are just reference points that their local superintendents can use. But I think, and as we speak to empowering teacher voice on this conversation as well, it's going to be, not every teacher, as you know, has the pleasure, the blessing, the opportunity to get together with other teachers to have these conversations. And so as teacher X, Y, and Z are being asked to be part of this conversation and being brought to the table about what should our district do, if we can give them at least a starting point to be an informed participant in that conversation of what should our local school district do and how should we measure attendance and what should grading look like and all those things from based on some other teachers' examples, we at least give them voice and some at least a resource to make them a strong voice and an advocate for that perspective as well.
This is Sarah again. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. And so I'm thinking about how valuable, I know my school found the surveys to be, how valuable at the state that survey you've shared with us is. I'm wondering if there's any kind of a survey that we could share with educators across the state, specifically educators, to get more feedback from educators so we have a more well-rounded view as well.
There is a survey that we implemented, but it wasn't really on this theme. So we do have some feedback on the needs of educators, and it was regarding online platform and would you use an online discussion space to collaborate? So we do have some data that I can share with you. I don't think it addresses this topic specifically, and like in the time of COVID, what do you need? But I do think it gives us an inkling that educators felt that I need more help with distance education. I needed some good exemplars for some lessons. I needed a resource bank to pull from, and I didn't have that. So I can share that with you, but know that the questions are not necessarily specific to this, but I do too. I wonder if it would be a valuable piece to collect and something we could talk about further when we meet.
That'd be good. And any information that you can share with us, however you might, because like I said, anytime DPI gets involved in some things, I always worry that it gets a little bit biased. If the questions come from us, then it becomes, there's, again, when you as teachers, when you have classroom questions, when it comes from you, when the question comes from you as a teacher, it's going to be different than when it's posed by one of their peers. The answer is going to be different. And so just wanting to have real authentic answers to our questions.
Yeah, I put it in the chat box, but early in the ESSA days when we were just trying to get information from teachers, I think we worked with NDU to get to just send out a mass mailing, and we really got good feedback from teachers on what they were thinking.
I see that. Yeah. So I'm going to share with you if I can find my pictures, and I'll probably just email them to you, but you'll appreciate, maybe I won't. I'm not going to, I'll send it. Once you see the pictures, you will understand why I'm very grateful that Joe took the time to create the notes. And I'm a very librarian linear type of person anyway, so. Well, once again, I have taken more time than I said I would take from you, but once again, I so appreciate the conversation and the feedback that we've been able to have today. You've added some, in addition to the meeting that we had today, I think we're going to have a full 3 days that will have lots of opportunity to produce some important resources, not guidance, but resources for our state to use. So, all right. As always, please call, text, write, whatever works for you. Take care.
Thanks,
you so
everyone.
Bye.